All right. Well, I am so excited about this, Cameron. I am completely intrigued by all things related to personality, and I am interested in hearing your perspective and your wisdom in this. So I want to welcome you and welcome everybody who is on, as well as those who will be watching the recording later. And so I think we're in for a real treat today. So just want to remind everybody who is on the call, I think you guys have all been on before, but just to keep yourselves muted. And if you have questions, please put those in the chat box. And let's continue just to chat about what we're hearing too during Cameron's presentation. And hopefully we'll have time at the end to get to some of those questions. So with that, I hand it over to you, Cameron.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm delighted to be with you guys and discuss one of my favorite things, which is personality traits, personality wiring, how it affects our parenting style, and certainly how it can help us understand our children and their natural wiring better. So there's, as you know, this is a vastly deep subject to broach in 45 minutes of a webinar. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of hit it from a very high level. And we're going to talk about four key characteristics of the personality. And I want to give you just one parenting takeaway from each of those four dimensions or dichotomies. So if we could start off with the first slide of the color wheel, Marcus, we can skip past that one. And this is always a really helpful image for me when we're talking about personality type. As you know, the color wheel is very dynamic. It is not static. There are no clear lines or edges, or there's not a clear beginning or end to the colors. As you can see, it's not easy. It's really clear to see where red is, but not really clear to say where red ends and where orange and yellow begins. But in America, in a 21st century mindset, let's go to the next slide, we have been raised to think that the color wheel is like this, with very clear lines, edges, and definitions. We like edges. We like boundaries. We like to know where one thing ends and another thing begins. And that serves us well in so many areas of our life, but not so much when we're thinking of personality, because our personalities are dynamic and there's movement to them, because we are complicated and deep human beings. So when we're talking about the personality types, I want you to keep this image in mind, because no doubt you'll say, well, I do these sort of things and I do these other sort of things, and my child does this and displays this. Of course they do. So we're not thinking of either or here, but we're really thinking of a continuum. We're thinking of a both and. So we'll start off by talking about the most common. Let's look here. All this is built on Carl Jung, a famous Swiss psychiatrist, his personality theory. And he noticed that the brain is always doing two things. It's always taking in information, always making decisions about that information on a conscious and subconscious level. So you know when your mind is, when you're always thinking about the decisions you have to make, but on a subconscious level, your brain never stops taking in information, and on autopilot, you're making decisions about that. And so Jung noted that we have a preferred way of using these mental processes. Next slide. So Jung noted that humans have this dual reality, that we live in the outer world of things, people, events, places, and then we also have this rich inner world of our thoughts that's abstract, our values, our convictions, certainly our feelings and how we see the world. These are dual realities that go on. You know this sensation when you've gone somewhere and you feel like you're sort of not fully present to the external world. Maybe you've had a stressful day, or maybe you've got a lot coming up and you're consumed by your inner world or some anxiety that's underlying. And sometimes our inner world can actually be stronger to us than our outer world. Well, Jung noted that certain people seem to have, next slide, an innate, inborn predisposition toward preferring their outer world of people, places, things, activities, or their inner world of their feelings, their thoughts, their reflections, their convictions, their values. Obviously, it's not either or. There's no human being who doesn't have an inner world or an outer world. But we do tend to prefer one, and sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. So this is the age-old debate of nature versus nurture. It's not either or, it is both and. We have an innate predisposition, a God-given wiring in our personality, and then we're also undoubtedly shaped by our nurturing environment, by our family, by our worldview, by our view in churches and politics. All of this shapes how we see the world and how we see ourselves. Okay, next slide. So as I said, we're going to talk really briefly today about 4 big dichotomies. And so that is the most common one, extroversion or introversion, is how we take in energy, how we gain energy, the things that drain us and the things that give us energy. Sensing and intuition is about how we take in information, how we like to learn things. Thinking and feeling is about how we make decisions. And then judging and perceiving is about how we order our external world. So if the process is we are taking in information and we're making a decision about that information, then we also have to decide how we're going to put that information into action in our actual world. And that's what that 4th dichotomy is about. So what we're going to do today, we'll start here with that very first one, extroversion and introversion, and we'll hit them all at a very high level. And then I'll give you one parenting takeaway through each one. So this first one is the one that everyone knows and has heard and uses this language most commonly, but oftentimes really misunderstands what lies at the heart of this idea of extroversion and introversion. There is a lot of stigma around it. So we tend to think in a stigmatic way of extroverted people like, next slide, like our friend here, Elle Woods. We see there's a stigma oftentimes from people with a preference toward introversion that extroverted people are just sort of shallow and ditzy and, oh my gosh, where's the party and where's the next fun thing? And I just can't stay focused on one little thing. I have to always be going, And likewise, there's an unhealthy stigma that introverted people are like these guys, like completely socially inept and I don't know what to do or how to have a conversation and I just want to write computer code. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. So extroversion and introversion is really about, do we prefer the outer world of engaging in person, people, places, things, activities, or do we have a preference? Does our internal world of our thoughts, emotions, reflections, values most natural to us? Now, however, so they do play out in our personality oftentimes in very predictable ways, but it is very incorrect to think you're either an extrovert or you are either an introvert. That's not a helpful polarization. You do extroverted and introverted things all day long, but you tend to have a preference. So people with a preference toward extroversion tend to be energized by interacting with others. So if they're in an office environment and they've got a chance to fire off a quick email or a text to their coworker, or if they could take a stroll and get some water or some coffee and pop into the office and have face-to-face interaction with someone, they are actually energized by that. They do tend to be more sociable and expressive. And they do, as we said before, like to communicate sort of face-to-face. Why? Because this whole facet is about energy. They feed off of the energy of other people. So when they get with other people that they know well, or even extroverted people love to meet new people. It's a new place to learn new information and to gain energy. And they prefer to do that face-to-face. And this is one of my favorite parts about my extroverted friends. They love to work out their ideas by talking them through. If you've ever, remember back to when you were in school and the teacher would ask the hypothetical question, not that didn't come with a concrete answer, but it was sort of, what do you think about such and such? Guarantee you the first hand up in the room was some kid with a preference toward extroversion, and he didn't know what he thought about it. He's just like, oh, me, I'll talk. And as they're talking, they're like, oh, wow, that is what I think about that. You can see the light bulbs coming on in them. They have to talk out their ideas. It's a really wonderful part of their personality. Now, people with a preference toward introversion, they're energized by the opportunity to reflect more than they are by that. So extroverted people are really looking, how can I connect with this person? But people with a preference toward introversion usually are energized by the opportunity to reflect. They tend to be a little bit more private and contained with their body language, with how much they're going to be involved and add to the conversation. They oftentimes are quite content to stand back and observe the conversation. And extroverted people can look at them and think maybe they're a little aloof or a little cold or a little disconnected. And oftentimes nothing could be further from the truth. They feel very connected to what's happening, but they don't feel the need to always be leading the conversation and always adding in. They're more absorbing it, taking it in to their rich inner world. So they are energized not so much by the opportunity to communicate face to face, but they like to journal or to write or to express their ideas in that way, because it helps them reach their inner world. So instead of working their ideas out by talking them through, they do tend to think them through. So if you ask a person with a preference toward introversion a question, it's likely that they'll go, or take a pause, or even literally take a step back. They're thinking about what you've asked them. They have to access it through their rich inner world, not so much through their sharp mind, like our extroverted friends. Okay, next slide. Marcus says he literally takes a step back. I tell you what, let's go back to the other slide, because I don't think we have time to get into all this, and I'll just leave this up for you. And while we're talking about our parenting tips here, you can make some notes there if that's helpful for you. So again, as we said, this dichotomy is about what gives us energy and what drains us energy. Okay. So when I want to talk parenting, it's so crucial that we as parents manage our energy so we can make space for our children's energy. So this is really big. If you have opposite preference of your children here, this can be, or your spouse, this could be a really big place for conflict. So think about it from your children. Children with a preference toward extroversion are oftentimes just a steady stream of words. Their consciousness is just always coming out of their mouth. Well, this happened the other day, and I was thinking about this, and what do you think about this? And this, just the steady commentary of life is always happening. It's easy to tune children out that have a preference toward extroversion, because they're always talking. It's important for us that as parents, we match their energy. This is really important. So we need to make sure we're giving clear communication about specific times they will get our attention. So obviously with a child with a preference toward extroversion who's just always giving you their social commentary, that can be overwhelming for a parent who has so many responsibilities. So a helpful strategy is, I love your stories. Stop what you're doing. Look them in the eye, match their energy, give them your connection. I love your stories, and I want to give you my full attention. Unfortunately, I can't give you my full attention right now. How about in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, in 1 hour? You set the time, and then we keep our word. We initiate. Initiation is huge for children with a preference toward extroversion. Socially, people with a preference toward extroversion, when they walk into a room, they subconsciously feel it is their job to initiate conversation with other people. People with a preference toward introversion, when they walk into social settings, they subconsciously feel it's their job to be on the receiving end of the communicating. So extroverted people walk into a room and go, okay, who can I connect with? How can I initiate? Introverted people tend to walk into a room and go, who will initiate with me? Who do I need to be open to? And they don't often realize they're doing it. But when we initiate with our extroverted children, this speaks their love language. So we say, hey, I want to circle back to that story you were telling me. And during that connection, we want to give them our undivided attention. So here's some helpful ways you can do that with your extroverted children. Your body language is huge, because extroverted children and people tend to be more gregarious and more expressive with their body language. Match theirs. Lean in with them. Make eye contact. Do things like say, oh, wow, yeah, oh, that's so fun. Extroverted people like to try to finish other people's sentences because they're just so into the moment. Well, do that with your children. within, respectfully. But they don't find that disrespectful. They actually find that engaging. They love it. So you're leaning in and you're like, oh, I bet it's going to end like this. And they're like, no, it's not going to end like that. Okay, well, tell me how it's going to end. But you're just matching their energy. And what it's saying, we say it with our words, we say it with our body language, we say it with our eyes. And what we're saying is, your energy is okay for me. Because here's the thing, extroverted people often grow up feeling like my energy is too much for people. We want to create them, and sometimes, let's be honest, it is, okay? But we want to create environments that our children are learning, hey, it's okay to learn how to manage all this energy you've got. And your energy is okay with me, and we'll learn together how to manage it, and I'll do my best to match it. So likewise, with our introverted children, we want to match their energy, and that often looks quite the opposite. We want to give them space to say it the way they need to say it. Now, parents with a preference toward extroversion, parenting introverted children, often want to finish their sentences for them because they just want them to hurry up and say what it is, because children with a preference toward introversion often tend to talk a little slower, talk a little more quietly. Why? They're accessing that rich inner world of their values, their emotions, their thought. And so parents who are often very hurried and have a lot on their plate are like, okay, come on, get through it, say it quickly. This is very disheartening and disrespectful to children with a preference toward introversion. We want to also say to them, your energy, your slower pace is okay with me. And I've got room for it, and I've got time for it. So it will be slower, it will be quieter, and they will be watching to see if we are actually engaged with them, or if we're just sort of, this is just sort of our placeholder here. People with a preference toward introversion, especially children, have an uncanny ability to note which family members truly make space for them and truly see them and truly care for their way of relating to the world. They're not the big outgoing ones who are standing, the funny ones who are always cracking jokes and drawing attention to them. So they're really looking like, who really wants to make space for me? So they don't want to be interrupted. Quiet affirmations that you are hearing them are really good. Just gentle, like physical touches. Just gentle responses. Oh, wow, that's nice. It says to them, I see you and I'm with you. So parents, this is about managing our own energy. How do you recharge? When do you recharge? When do you make sure that you're managing your energy so that you're making space for theirs? When do you connect with your kids? And a big, because this can feel overwhelming to us parents here, quality over quantity here, okay? Quality and consistency over quantity, especially if you've got extroverted children, man, they want quantity. They're always begging for quantity. I just need your attention. I need your attention. You need your attention. But actually research supports that they really don't need our attention all the time. They need quality time where there are bursts, 10, 15, 20 minutes, a couple of times throughout the day where they have our undivided attention. We are managing our energy well so that we can make space for theirs. So a couple of practical things. At least one meal together in a day. For some family, breakfast can be very meaningful. For other families, that could be dinner, but a place where they are watching us model boundaries and managing our energy well. So if we're always rolling into dinner, like having not managed our energy well, and we're just leaking out toxicity, and we're like, oh God, and we're clearly distracted, and we're clearly multitasking, and we're not giving our dinner and our family and our children our undivided attention, we are, make no mistake about it, discipling our children to follow in our ways. Extroverted children will tend to respond to that by just with rebellion and showing out because they're really asking for attention. And introverted children will do that by checking out, withdrawing. And so lastly, we need to be sure with our extroverted children that we don't confuse an abundance of words for connection, because they have no shortage of words. And we can't say, well, they talk all the time, so we have meaningful connection. Not necessarily. Sometimes with extroverted people, it can actually be really hard to talk about the deeper, more vulnerable things. And we have to make space to get there with them. And we shouldn't confuse a lack of words from our introverted children as contentment. Well, they're never really asking for a connection, so they seem to be fine. And they're quite happy being alone all the time. And as a general rule, they are more comfortable being alone than our extroverted children. But no children goes without a deep desire and need for connection. All right, so there is a broad view of extroversion and introversion. If you've got anything that stood out to you or any questions, throw them in the chat box and we can circle back to them. Sarah, you finish sentences all the time? I'm curious, do you have a preference toward extroversion or introversion, Sarah?
I consider myself pretty much down the line, but I lean extroversion.
Yeah.
But when you said that about finishing sentences, that I'm definitely guilty of that, but I see that as connecting with somebody, and I understand not everybody may receive it that way, so that's something I do have to be careful with. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. People, even with people with a preference toward introversion, again, they tend to have a shorter circle of relationships that they go really deep with, where extroverted people value breadth. But when introverted people are with their people, they often take on very extroverted characteristics. And so it can look like, yes, finishing sentences or being very gregarious and expressive. But it usually tends to be with a few people that they really connect with, more so than just, this is me all the time, Okay. Well, as you could tell, we could talk literally all day about that one facet. And there's so much about that to glean from how our work habits, our spiritual habits, our connection with our spouse, and how we parent. But we're going to move on to the next one, which is sensing and intuition. And this is the way we take in information. So as we said earlier, on a conscious and subconscious level, our brains are always assessing our environments and taking in information. We tend to do that in very specific ways. So let me give you a quick illustration here in the next photo. This is a good one. So Adam, back up, sorry. As a general rule, people with a preference towards sensing do tend to they trust facts. They tend to be specific. They tend to be what is practical, what is real, what is concrete. Where people with a preference toward intuition tend to be future oriented, very theoretical. Instead of what is, they're asking what could be. They're very imaginative, drawing assumptions and looking for metaphors. So let me give you an example here from this next photo. So I love to do this when working with groups. Never fails for a really great laugh. We divide the room for people who feel like they have a preference towards sensing or intuition. And we ask them the simple question, what do you see? What do you see? So it's really wonderful. The people with a preference toward sensing are usually over there scratching their head like this is the oddest question in the world. What do you mean? What do I see? And they usually have 3, 4, or sometimes 5 follow-up questions like, what do you actually want me to do in this time? And how do I do and accomplish this exercise correctly? What do you mean? What do I see? So the intuitives never ask any questions. They are off to the races. What do I see? Oh my gosh, I see this is a picture out of a movie. I know this is a picture out of a movie. And this girl right here, she just went through a breakup. I'm telling you, and I bet you she just had this big fight with her boyfriend, and it's been building and building and building, and she knew it was coming, but she just didn't want to believe that it was coming. And then it just came to a head, and now it's over, and she stormed off, and she's gone to her favorite place out where they used to have picnics. I bet you their favorite song is playing. They just got this whole idea of what's going on. I see sadness. I see introspection. I see loneliness. I see despair. Oh, but someone says, no, but look at the sunrise in the background. There's hope coming. Hope is on the dawn. She's looking ahead. She's remembering back to that one relationship that she left. But, they just have this whole story. And then we go to the sensing people and we're like, okay, what do you see? And without fail, the first thing on their document is a girl. We see a girl. She has blonde hair. She's wearing a red, white dress. She has a black belt. She's sitting in a field. And then there's always a photographer in the group who says, and there's a sunburst. That's a sun flare. That's a technique that photographers use to create depth and dimension. So it's very, all right, let's go to the next slide. Skip this one and skip that one. And here we are. So sensing people, what they are the asking what is, and the intuitives are asking the why. Okay, so sensing people build carefully and thoroughly toward conclusions. There's a girl, they're very factual, they're very concrete. It's what I can touch, what I can taste, what I can see, what I can experience with my being. Whereas intuitive people are very conceptual. They're asking, what does this mean? What is the artist trying to convey here? They use metaphors and analogies, and they are the gut people. Okay. How does this play out for us in our parenting? You can leave this slide right here. This is about how our children learn tasks. And we know that their primary function in becoming adults is learning how the world works. And sensing kids and intuitive kids go about this very important task in very different ways. So sensing kids tend to be the microscope, and intuitive kids tend to be the telescope. Okay, sensing kids are going to walk up and see the trees and the leaves on the trees, and intuitive kids are going to walk up and see the forest. So sensing kids are always asking how. How does this work? Intuitive kids are always asking why. Why does this work? Why do we even need this? Do we even need this? So when the child is really interested in something, for example, a tree, sensing children are more likely to ask a million questions about the details related to their interest. How many leaves are on that tree? How tall is that tree? How deep do the roots go, do you think? How does water get from the, older kids will ask more complicated questions, but they're asking how does this work? And intuitive kids tend to ask why. They tend to be more like, why do we have trees? And where do trees come from? And what purpose do they serve? They're thinking in this way of why the world works the way it works, where sensing kids tend to be like, just tell me how the world works and what is expected of me. So research says that about 70% of people on planet Earth have a preborn preference towards sensing, and about 30% of the Earth have an innate predisposition toward intuition. So like in reading, children with a preference toward sensing tend to be a little slower, deliberate readers, absorbing every details. Intuitives want to be speed readers. They want to be fast readers. They just want to skim it and get the big idea. Now, how does this play out in school? Well, you can see those with a preference towards sensing, often they want to follow the rules, they want to know what the teacher expects of them, and they want to do it that way. Intuitives want to just understand the big idea. My oldest son, who has a real clear preference for intuition, was always getting in trouble with math because he never wanted to show his work. He was just like, I know the answer and I get the big idea and I get how this works. I want to do it and move on to the next thing. Where the teacher was like, nope, would you please tell your son he has to show the work. He has to show his division. He has to show how he got to that answer. Whereas sensing people love showing the work. So this can play out like in our chores. Children with a preference towards sensing, they want to know what steps should be taken and how to do the chore in the expected way. And intuitive parents can get in trouble when they're not giving their sensing children enough information or enough support. They want support in knowing how the world works. And where intuitive children really need the liberty to sort of figure it out on their own. And they really need the freedom within the boundaries to go, hey, here's the project, here's where we're going, you figure out how it works for you, come back to me if you have any questions. Intuitive children tend to thrive that way, where sensing children feel slightly overwhelmed if they feel like they don't have enough information to make the decisions or to execute in what is expected of them. There's a great story of my good buddy David Walker. You guys know him. He's an intuitive off the charts, and his son Levi is a very sensing oriented child. And David and Lauren were telling us that when Levi is stressed or worried, he's really comforting to him when his dad gives him a real story from his past with very concrete details about how it played out. Because again, they're very linear. Sensing children don't do well with broad brush statements of like, it'll be okay. There's nothing to worry about. You'll be fine. Just hang with me. You'll see. That's hard for them because they want very real concrete steps to take. So our big idea that I want to leave you with here in parenting, this is about how we learn. And there's a lot of very interesting research right now surfacing the paradigm between intelligence versus effort. If you were raised, we were raised oftentimes with our parents placing a huge value on telling us how intelligent and smart we are. I remember this, my mom and my grandmother doing this all night. You're so smart, you can do anything. Well, research is showing that actually is undermining. Giving the kids the label smart can actually prevent them from performing at their highest capacity. Why? Because they think that innate intelligence is the key to success. And they begin to discount the importance of effort. They tend to think if this doesn't come easy and naturally to me, then I must not be able to do it. And they discount and they gravitate only toward things that become easily and natural to them. So this is real big. Sensing and intuitive children will do this in different ways. Sensing children, we have to teach them that we live in a world that sometimes doesn't always have clear and concrete steps, and that's okay. And just by trying new things and having the freedom to not know what the next and experiment is a very valuable thing. And that it teaches our children that when we work at things and when we display effort, even if we don't know how it'll all work out, that's okay. Intuitive children, because they are the sort of impulsive gut kind of people, they tend to think, if I don't get it right off, I don't want it. And that can show up as them also displaying a lack of effort in areas that they just have to learn. Hey, some things already have a tried and true process, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We actually just need to follow the steps. That's going to be really hard for intuitive children. Like when my two kids sit down to play Uno, it never fails. My intuitive child, he's always got this new way he wants to play Uno. He's like, oh, you know what if we do it this way? And what if we try this way? And what if we don't play that rule where, you do this? What if we add, and my sensing child, this makes his little brain want to explode. And he's like, no, there are rules and we will just follow the rules. And here's what he wants to say. This is what my sensing child wants to say, but usually he just says, you're such a butt. But what he wants to say is, my whole world revolves around learning new things all the time. And I actually find a lot of comfort in having a few things that I don't have to reinvent. We just know the rules and we just stick to the rules. Sensing children are often one that, so if you're an intuitive parent and you're parenting a sensing child, watch for this gap in how you do new things. Likewise, if you're a sensing parent and you've got an intuitive child who's always questioning why we do the things we do and wanting to try new processes, figure out the ways you can give him or her some freedom within the boundaries. Okay, that's sensing and intuition. All right, we're going to plow on through here. So if that one is about how we take in information, thinking and feeling is about how we make decisions. And so next slide, please. So there's a lot of confusion around this one too. This doesn't mean that people with a preference toward thinking don't have emotions or aren't emotional, and people who have a preference for feeling don't have logic or don't possess the ability to make rational decisions. But they tend to lead with one or the other. Okay, next slide. People with a preference toward thinking tend to, when there is a problem to be solved, a question to be answered, they tend to step back and they tend to analyze. They tend to think, how can I make an objective, logical decision here if my feelings and emotions are all caught up? People with a preference toward feeling do exactly the opposite. They don't naturally want to analyze the situation. They want to empathize with the situation. They want to step in. They want to touch it. They want to understand it. They want to say, what would it be like if I had to walk a mile in this person's shoes? So next slide. So that plays out. People with a preference toward thinking tend to cause and effect reasoning, solve problems with logic. But people with a preference towards feeling, they're guided by group values. They're thinking, how does this impact the family or the culture or the community? Okay, so how does this play out in our parenting and in our children? So parents with a preference toward thinking tend to be direct and to the point. They want to just hit problems head on. So I know a recent one in our talk, we've got an almost 13-year-old. So for the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of time prepping our oldest son and having, well, all the sex talks. Well, I can tell you, my wife has a real clear preference for thinking and I for feeling. And she is just a very direct, we're just going to hit this head on. This whole conversation made me quite nervous, to be honest with you. And I'm always subconsciously thinking, okay, how are we going to ease into this? How are we going to sort of back into this? And she's kind of coming at it like, what in the world is there to ease into? Like, this is just a real natural part of life. And if we don't talk to him about it, somebody's going to talk to him about it. I hope it's going to be us that's talking to him about it. Now seems like a good time. Calls him in here, sits him on the bed, and we're just having the talk. And I'm like, oh boy, this is awkward for me. But they tend to be direct and to the point. Whereas feelers tend to think, how do you feel about this? And how's it going? And are you okay with this? They're empathizing with the person's experience. This is a really important paradigm for us to understand when we are of the opposite preference with our children. So our children, our thinking children, will tend to make decisions by their logic and rational thinking. And oftentimes this comes out in children. It can seem on the surface as disrespectful. They can often push back and say and question things. And it looks like they might question authority when really they're trying to understand what the logic is and what the rationale is here. And if we don't understand that, we can tend to squelch this really great gift in our children by telling them they're just simply being disrespectful by questioning, instead of empowering them to ask questions in respectful ways. That's a very different approach to this paradigm. And they're going to tend to want more autonomy and to be themselves and to make their own decisions. And that is a good thing. Whereas our children with a preference towards feeling are going to tend to want more affection and to want more empathy from us and to want more connection in an emotional way. But I want to focus on this one really about parenting styles, because as a general rule, whether you tend to parent from an analytical standpoint or you tend to parent toward an empathetic standpoint, at the end of the day, we must help our children learn to make decisions for themselves. Now, feeling parents tend to, not always of course, but they can have helicopter parent tendencies. So they can confuse loving the child with revolving their entire life around the child. Why? Because their paradigm is, I receive love by emotional connection. So they're always trying to give that to their children, oftentimes in ways that the children are not asking for or it's not really helpful. So unhealthy ways this plays out. If you have a tendency toward helicopter parenting, you might be the parent that is forever running left homework up to school, or, oh, my child left their lunch. I don't want them to starve. I better get them their lunch today. Or giving extra gas money to our teenagers who didn't manage their money properly, or always bailing, or always wanting to step in and empathize. We make the mistake of loving them. We make the mistake of rescuing them with loving them. But actually what we're doing is creating a child who is dependent upon their parent and not being autonomous and standing on their own. Likewise, or on the other side of things, thinking parents, when they're stressed or under pressure, can tend to be drill sergeant parents. Like, these kids will be disciplined if it kills me, right? And often it does. It kills their peace, it kills their joy, and it kills their connection with their kid. They want to step back. Oftentimes their tendency can be to analyze and criticize what the kid is doing wrong and how they're not doing it efficiently enough. And they mistake controlling their child with loving with their child. So feeling parents will tend to swoop in and rescue. And oftentimes, now we're getting deep into personality stuff. It's remarkable how many times a feeling spouse marries a thinking spouse, and how we become, and if we get caught in the trap of shaming our spouse's personality instead of celebrating we will double down, and the feeling people will stand their ground on their values as a feeler, and the thinking spouse will stand their ground on the values of being logical and rational. And this is not just a male-female thing. As I said early, I have a preference for feeling and my wife for thinking. And early in our marriage, this was a big source of conflict for us, until we learned to stop fighting one another and start fighting for one another and meet in the middle and leverage one another's strength for a holistic view of parenting our children. So this is really important. We want to make sure we're not sending the message that helicopter parents are often sending the message, you are fragile and you can't make it without me. And thinking parents are often sending the subconscious message, you can't think for yourself, so I'll do it for you. So we need to watch what is our personality disposition here, and how are we making space for our children to do that? Last little bit there. I always like to say, let the feelers be sad and let the thinkers be mad. Okay? Feeling when in conflict and when in hard times, children with a preference toward feeling will often display that through sadness. Okay? They'll just be sad. Where children with a preference toward thinking, they will just be mad. And oftentimes parents will try to control both of them. You shouldn't be so sad. You shouldn't be so mad. Well, actually, it's an exercise in futility to try to control another person's emotions, especially our children. Instead, what we should do is really try to empathize and connect with them. So sometimes we want to protect our children from feeling, and this is impossible. Instead, our goal should be to teach them healthy ways to deal with their feelings and deal with their emotions. So feeling children will tend to withdraw, and they can draw into a sort of a gloomy place. And we shouldn't throw the rope of just shallow optimism and say, oh, don't feel sad. Oh, just get over it. No, we should crawl down in the pit with them and say, being sad is hard. I understand how it feels. And here's some things I like to do when I'm sad. I can go for a walk. I talk to a friend, or I just be active, And likewise, when thinking children are mad, we shouldn't tell them they shouldn't be mad. We should just give them healthy strategies to deal with their anger. The message we want to send is, it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to handle your anger in disrespectful and irresponsible ways. So we're saying to them, I know how it feels to be angry. When I'm angry, sometimes I need to step away and cool off. Would you like to step away and cool off right now? We have to help our children, redirect them so that they're learning to deal with their emotions and to deal with their frustrations in positive and affirming ways. Okay. Any other questions, Sarah? I haven't been monitoring the chat box. Anything we need to hit really quickly?
No, we are all identifying ourselves as thinking or feeling parents. And already I've seen a couple who has opposite thinking and feeling. One is one and the other is feeling. So that's how my husband and I are. He's the thinker and I'm the feeler. And yes, there's definitely conflict there at times.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking through each of my kids as well. So yes, I think all of us are identifying with this for sure, Cameron.
Great. Well, we're going to hit this last one in super, super fast. Okay, so we've discussed how do you gain energy? What gives you energy? What drains? How do you take in information? How do you make decisions about that information? And now lastly, we talk about how do we order our external world based upon the information we've received and the decisions we've made. Okay, so this is a big one. People with a preference toward judging tend to look at the world and they simply see decisions that need to be made. Okay, they tend to be very practical and pragmatic. They want to make quick decisions, and they resist reopening or reconsidering those decisions once they've made. So they just are kind of maximizers in that sense. Like, we're just going to make a decision and move on. People who prefer perceiving, they want to experience the world, not organize it. They see options to be explored, not concrete decisions that need to be made. So how does this play out in our world? And just a reminder, we do both of these things in different areas of our life, but we tend to have a preference toward one. So where people with a preference toward judging or organized, people with a preference toward perceiving tend to be more adaptable, more fluid. People with a preference toward judging are sort of just straight line. They are plan the work and work the plan kind of people. And people who are perceiving are more like, hey, it's fun to just sort of roll with it every once in a while, or most of the time, and fly by the seat of your pants anytime we can. You know, they're more fluid, they're more casual, and they're certainly more curious about the options. Where people with a preference toward judging are like, you know what, options can just simply overwhelm me. Give me one or two things and just let me make a decision and let me move on and get on with my life. Where perceiving are like, options? How many options do I have? Give me all the options. I mean, who knows what could come if I've got one more option. All right, next slide. So again, this is about how we order things. So people with a preference toward judging, very planned approach to meeting the deadline. All right. So if they're working on any kind of project or goal, they tend to just sort of subconsciously see it in chunks of time, very linear. Well, if this is my end goal, then I need to break this up into 4 parts, and then I'll subdivide these parts. And they love to check boxes, and they love to cross things off, and they love to go, all right, here's my first goal of my larger deadline, and here's my micro goals to my first goal. Check, 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 done. And they love to do it in the order that they've laid out. Again, plan the work, work the plan. Perceiving people are precisely the opposite. They are very goal-driven as well, but they want to do it the way they want to do it. They want to feel it out. They want to have options. Instead of starting at task 1, they might just jump over somewhere and right in the middle of the project and start figuring it out, and then back up to the front. And it can look like procrastination. It can look like, but actually it's more about process. And so they want to have their options open. And usually there is a surge of energy when they're close to the deadline. So how does this play out for children? Well, it plays out in my house. My youngest daughter, who will be 9 this summer, she's a chip off her mama's block. She has a real clear preference for judging. And man, she's got a way. She makes every morning she wakes up, she makes quick decisions about what she wants to do. She makes a plan, she writes it out, and she gets it done. It's remarkable. And I want to tell you, it's real easy to celebrate a child who has that natural disposition. My son wakes up, my oldest son, and it's like every day is a clean slate. What should I do today? Let me remind you, the same thing we've done every other day. You're getting dressed, you're having breakfast, you're going to school. Like, this is not up for debate, son, and he's always wanting to explore what else could we do? How could we do it in a different way? He's an intuitive and a perceiving. It's a double whammy with this one. And it's easy to criticize a child like that instead of giving them the freedom that he needs within boundaries. So really quickly, our big parenting idea here is how do we function within the midst of routine? If you are a parent with a preference toward perceiving, routines will undoubtedly be hard for you. But research is very clear. Your children need routine. They need to know what's coming. They need to know what's expected of them. Children thrive in this. But we can go about this in very different ways with our children. Children with a preference toward judging and sensing, by the way, will thrive with routine. They want to just know what's expected and knock it out. Digital learning day, my second grader was up every morning at the crack of dawn, having her breakfast, checking on the dogs, and then clocking in and getting her work done. Bam, 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 bam. My oldest son, oh my word. Like his way of approaching was hilarious. But here's what we've learned we have to do with him. Screen time is a big motivator for him. So you want screen time? It's not a privilege. You earn it. You earn it by doing these things. But here's the freedom we're going to give you. You can do that within this block of time and this boundaries any way you want. You know what? And if you don't want screen time until 5 p.m. on digital learning days, or 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., that is your choice. You have the freedom to do it within a framework. And we as the parents will, set that framework. But we're giving them freedom to sort of move. And that looks like multitasking. That looks like starting one project, putting his hand to another project. And within reasonable boundaries, we need to let our perceiving children have the freedom they need to multitask. It's actually energizing for them. So obviously there's so much more to be said about that. But these are just some general guidelines. Okay. Marcus and Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel seen. Oof.
Most definitely. Yes, I agree, Marcus. Yeah, it's like you've been in my house, Cameron, and have seen some of the struggles. I do have one question for you. Have you seen in your experience, in your own life, but talking to other parents and kids as well, is there one difference? So if you are a thinking parent and your child is a feeling child, or introvert, extrovert, which opposite seems to be the most difficult in your experience? Sure,
you nailed it. The thinking, feeling one
is that it?
The most conflict, yeah. Because it is about, yes, it is about how we make decisions and what we're going to value. And again, feeling children often want to feel valued, and emotions are not logical. They're just not. And sometimes they don't, you know, the old saying that we have a $5 reaction to a 5-cent problem. Like, emotions are just not logical. And that's really hard for parents and spouses who tend towards being very logical and rational. It's like, let's just come on, get it together and let's move on and make a decision and be done with it, you know. And that causes a lot of room for conflict if we don't learn the correct ways to meet one another. And then the next one I would say could be this last one, judging and perceiving. Because parents who, both ways. I mean, parents with a preference toward perceiving oftentimes really struggle with just routine and having schedule. And that can really set off children who really need that, and vice versa. So those are the two big ones to just watch and really get some help and coaching. There's a lot of amazing resources out there to help in these with these types of issues.
So if parents or spouses want to learn more, what resources would you recommend?
Well, there's oh my goodness, Sarah, I am absolutely blanking on the book that is about type for children. Look at me, the Mr. Type guy, and I'm blanking on the best resource out there. I tell you what, let me get that back and post that for anyone.
Okay.
And if anyone's interested, you can email me at cameron@gfc.tv, and I can get you the link to that book. But another one that's not specifically about type, but it has to do with all these principles, are the New Kid by Friday books by Kevin Lehman. Those books are packed with such good practical wisdom and principles. And so he's got the New Kid by Friday. He's got the New Teenager by Friday. I think he has one, a different one even for adult children. But Dr. Kevin Lehman, and those packed some amazing principles in those books that we've
Awesome.
kind of hit today.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the correct spelling. Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, great. All right. Well, this has been so good, and I've seen application immediately too in marriage. So thank you you didn't know you were doing a marriage webinar too, but but you were.
Awesome.
Both in how we relate to each other, but how we also parent as couples to our kids. So thank you, Cameron. We really do appreciate it.